Mr. Long and the innkeeper returned home around nearly 11 a.m. At home, the innkeeper's wife had already set the table, arranged the dishes neatly. Before stepping inside, the innkeeper cautiously glanced at the bamboo pile and remarked, "Don't worry, your stuff won't go missing on my watch." True to his words, the brown cloth-covered armrest remained in its place. Later that day, when the innkeeper returned, he noticed Mr. Long holding something inside the armrest, but upon his departure, he found no disturbance to it. Not daring to inquire further, the innkeeper opened the gate and invited Mr. Long inside. The lunch that day was lively and bustling. Before leaving, Mr. Long instructed his family not to look glum but to smile and act as if nothing had happened. The wine flowed freely, and the table was laden with delicacies. By the time they realized, the afternoon had slipped away. It was only then that Mr. Long straightened up and exclaimed, "Oh dear, it's almost 4 p.m. Lost track of time drinking. It's too late to leave now, I might not find a place to stay. Could you perhaps let me stay here for the night? I'll leave early tomorrow." Would that be possible? The innkeeper and his wife, taken aback, replied hesitantly, "Yes, of course. But all our beds are occupied. Would it be inconvenient?" Mr. Long smiled. "Don't worry, I can sleep on a long chair. Just lend me a blanket." With that said, he stood up and settled into the chair. The innkeeper's wife hurried to fetch him a blanket. Turning around, Mr. Long was already snoring softly, oblivious to the surroundings. Around 6 p.m., the innkeeper's mother, her face buried in the wall, finally stirred. Her once flowing hair, now sparse and grey, made a solemn sight. Getting out of bed, seemingly uninterested in the stranger's snoring, she muttered, "Where's my rice?" Perhaps accustomed to such occurrences lately, the innkeeper's wife quickly brought out the meal already prepared from the kitchen. Sitting quietly on the porch, under the flickering oil lamp, the elderly woman ate voraciously, finishing what was meant for 3. Not only that, she used her nails to scrape the burnt rice from the pot, devouring every morsel of vegetables and meat. Mr. Long pretended to sleep but watched the entire scene with half-closed eyes. A woman nearly 70 years old, yet eating heartily, far healthier than any young man. No one would believe she was 70 this year. After finishing, her daughter cleaned up, but she quietly went out into the backyard without saying a word. The sound of water splashing could be heard from behind the house, perhaps she was washing her hands or drinking. Then, Mr. Long heard footsteps rustling and the clatter of someone moving through the overgrown garden. Cackle. Pock. Crack. The sound of a rooster crowing echoed from the backyard. The innkeeper's wife's voice rang out. "Mom, it's night already. Why are you still going to the chicken coop?" No response came from the elderly woman as she continued to make her way inside the house. In rural areas, households usually turned in early, and outside, only the sound of frogs could be heard. The innkeeper's wife's house was no exception, today, with Mr. Long lying on a chair outside and inside, the innkeeper and his wife lay on their bed, next to the crib of their few-month-old son. In the outer room was the bed of the elderly woman, with all oil lamps turned off, except one, still burning next to the water table near Mr. Long's chair. This too was arranged at Mr. Long's request by the innkeeper. "Loit. Zoet. Loit. Zoet." The sound of footsteps echoed as the elderly woman passed by where Mr. Long lay. Just before she reached the room of the innkeepers, their infant son, who had been silent all day, suddenly cried out, "Oe! Oe! Oe!" Mrs. Innkeeper rose, cradled the child, and as she prepared to lift him for comforting, the elderly woman stood at the door, disheveled hair framing her face, her gaze fixed on her granddaughter. She smiled gently and said, "Leave him there, let me rock him." He he he. Good child, so good, Grandma loves you, Grandma loves you. Watching this scene, Mrs. Innkeeper hesitated, reluctant to hand over her child, but she remembered her husband's words before they retired for the night. The teacher said let Grandma hold him a little longer today. Don't interfere, let's try to ignore it. With gritted teeth, she relented and allowed the elderly woman to cradle the child. As she held the baby, the elderly woman continued her rhythmic rocking and softly sang. Cai, co, may go, eat, at night. Soft stems, o, ah. Lo and behold, ah, ao. Hi, hi, hi. So well behaved, so quiet, no more crying now. Passing by the water-drinking table where an oil lamp still burned, Mr. Long lifted his blanket slightly to watch. And the moment Mr. Long had been waiting for finally arrived. The shadow of a person cast on the house wall under the lamplight wasn't the stooped figure of a 70-year-old woman, but the silhouette of a woman leading a child, not cradling one. Suddenly, the elderly woman stopped and looked towards the chair where Mr. Long lay. Co. 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 A snore rang out, nothing unusual. The elderly woman continued on her way back to her bed, singing all the while. Sing, co, you go, ah, eat, late night. Soft stems, oh, ah. Lo and behold, ah, ao. Hi, hi, hi. So well behaved, so quiet, no more crying now. Crossing by the water-drinking table, where the oil lamp still burned. Mr. Long slightly lifted his blanket to watch. Husband and wife, who own a hostel, looked at each other, bewildered by Mr. LNG's incomprehensible speech. In the house, there were only 2 rooms, a small bedroom where the couple and their son slept, and outside, a table for drinking water. Inside, there was a bed where the wife of the hostel owner slept. Reflecting on the previous night, Mr. LNG had slept on a long chair. Therefore, if the old lady had not slept on the bed, where else could she have slept? Just as the wife of the hostel owner was considering this, she hurriedly said, So, is it true that my mother usually sleeps under the bed, right? The hostel owner saw his wife's reasoning as logical. The eggshells under the bed explained some of this, but Mr. LNG shook his head. No, the old lady just eats raw eggs and throws the shells under the bed. Her nightly sleeping spot is different. That's also why this house is haunted. The hostel owner thought harder but still couldn't understand where Mr. LNG was talking about. Oh. 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 The rooster crowed again. Seeing the hostel owner surprised, Mr. LNG continued. Recently, around midnight, the old lady would crawl into the wardrobe to sleep. The house ghost is coming from that wardrobe. The hostel owners looked at each other in shock and exclaimed. The wardrobe? How could it be the wardrobe, sir? Mr. LNG replied. That wardrobe is certainly made of coffin wood. Perhaps the person who made it didn't even know it was coffin wood. This is rare but possible. Some wealthy graves contain valuables like gold, silver, and jewelry. Even the coffin wood itself must be good quality and expensive. Thieves who understand wood would recognize its value. They'd split it into pieces, sell it to wood shops at lower prices, but it's still good quality. Carpenters who buy this wood to make furniture wouldn't know it's someone's coffin. The ghost in the house comes from that wardrobe, so every night, the old lady crawls into sleep, like a corpse in a coffin. Hearing this, the hostel owners shivered in fear and realized anew. The wife reconsidered and said, Dear. That's right. That wardrobe. My mother brought it home just a month before I gave birth. The hostel owner asked his wife. But where did she buy that wardrobe? She replied. She didn't buy it. It was from a relative's house in the village. Uncle Saw was a distant relative of my mother's, and he passed away a year ago. His house was abandoned for a year because his son worked on the border for a long time. He came back recently to sell the house and everything in it to people he knew. My mother saw the wardrobe was new and made of good wood, so she asked to bring it home. I remember when I came here to prepare for childbirth, my mother was proud to have gotten such a beautiful wardrobe. But who could have known the wardrobe would turn out like this? Mr. Long sighed deeply. Do you know, madam, why Mr. Saw passed away? The landlady's face turned pale. Hesitatingly she replied. Mr. Saw lived alone. On the day he passed away, the neighbors rushed over to borrow a spade, calling out repeatedly with no answer. Peering inside, they found him already stiff and lifeless. I only heard later that Mr. Saw had died from a sudden heart attack. His limbs were twisted, eyes staring upwards at the ceiling, froth at his lips. They said his death was terrifying. The innkeeper looked at Mr. Long with a troubled expression. Sir, could it be because of? Mr. Long nodded. It's very likely. If this spirit has taken a life, its vengeance will be severe. I suspect, not more than 3 months from now, the old lady will also pass away, and the next to be taken will be your son. This cannot continue, the situation is grave. I cannot stay here any longer. Tonight, I will capture this spirit for you both. The cause is clear, this task should not be too difficult. But to accomplish this, you both must follow what I am about to instruct. The innkeeper's wife and husband nodded, waiting expectantly. Mr. Long continued. Yesterday, I observed that the old lady only gets up at dusk. Has she always been like this? The landlady answered. Yes, only recently, just a few days ago. Before that, my mother used to eat lunch regularly. Mr. Long nodded knowingly. It's because yin energy has entered her body over time, weakening her yang energy. That's why she fears daylight. That's why I said if this continues, I fear the old lady will pass away within 3 months. Turning to the innkeeper, Mr. Long asked. Are the white salt and incense I asked you to buy still here? The innkeeper nodded. Yes, they are still here. I left them in the iron chest under the kitchen. Mr. Long instructed. Now, grind the incense into powder and mix it with the white salt. After mixing, sprinkle it around the house, sprinkle it around the rooms, and especially in front of your door and your son's room. This will prevent the old lady from approaching your son any further. Part of the spirit of that child has already been taken. Last night, I saw the shadow of a child being led away by a ghost. That was part of the old lady's spirit being taken. If it takes all the remaining parts of the spirit, your son will die. Because his spirit has been taken, the child lies limp all day. Follow my instructions, and it won't be difficult to eliminate this spirit. But what's difficult is to recover the part of the child's spirit that has been taken. I have prepared everything. While the rooster crows, boil ginger water mixed with wine for me. After boiling, add warm water and bathe the child. Meanwhile, you, sir, grind the incense and mix it with the salt as I said. After bathing the child, change his clothes and diaper. Do not let him sleep in the cradle anymore, let him sleep on the bed. Dispose of the cradle outside. Finally, sprinkle the mixed salt and incense around the room. Act immediately. As the innkeeper's wife and husband quickly followed Mr. Long's instructions before dawn, he took out a small piece of golden paper from his pocket, about the size of a fingertip, and bit his index finger until it bled. He dabbed his blood onto the paper and handed it to the innkeeper's wife, adding, "Stick this on the child's forehead. This way, when you take him for a bath, he won't cry. I will leave now and return only in the evening. Once everything is done as I instructed, both of you continue with your daily work. When evening falls, before I return, place 3 oil lamps near the drinking water tank where I slept last night. Prepare food and water as usual for the old lady, and leave the door open for me. At 7 p.m., both of you must stay inside the room and absolutely do not step outside. Remember this, before entering the room, light those 3 oil lamps. The innkeeper's wife fretted. Sir, where are you going? Will you come back? Mr. Long nodded reassuringly. Don't worry, I have never abandoned a task halfway. Yesterday, I said I would leave this morning. If I had stayed longer, it might not have been a good thing. When the time comes, I will return, and besides capturing this spirit, I need something else. You too, don't worry, everything will be fine soon. My nippers are still here, why can't I come back? With that, Mr. Long hurried the innkeeper's wife and husband to follow his instructions before the sky fully brightened. Following Mr. Long's instructions precisely, the innkeeper took yesterday's firewood and poured it into a mortar, grinding it into powder, then mixing it with white salt. After the child finished bathing in ginger wine water, his skin regained some rosy hue. Everything happened exactly as Mr. Long had instructed. Now, all that remained was to wait until evening to see if Mr. Long returned and how this matter would be resolved. The time passed steadily, and as another long day drew to a close, the sky gradually darkened. It was nearly 6 p.m., yet Mr. Long had not returned. As usual, the elderly mother of the innkeeper couple was just waking up at this hour, and she demanded her dinner. After eating, instead of going out to the garden like every other day, she climbed back into bed, lying face down against the wall. The innkeeper couple tidied up while anxiously glancing outside the gate, worried whether Mr. Long would return. Ribbit. 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 A frog croaked near the rice paddy, nearing 7 p.m. with still no sign of Mr. Long. Remembering their teacher's advice. At 7 p.m., when the elderly couple prepares to enter the room to care for their grandson, both of you must stay quietly inside, absolutely not stepping outside. Checking the clock, there were only 5 minutes left until 7 p.m. Sitting quietly inside the room, the innkeeper couple hurriedly closed the room door tightly. Outside, the bed where the elderly mother lay began to emit eerie sounds. Cree-eek. 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 The old woman shifted in her bed, causing the bed frame to creak ominously. Through the crack in the door, the innkeeper couple exchanged fearful glances, refraining from breathing loudly under the light of 3 oil lamps casting shadows of the old woman onto the dark floor. Squeak-kay. Squeak-kay. The sound of footsteps approached the room's door, but today, their young son, usually quick to cry, remained silent. A small yellow stained paper was still stuck to his forehead, soaked with Mr. Long's blood. Exactly at 7 p.m., the innkeeper couple jumped in fright as someone knocked heavily on the door from outside. Knock. 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 Accompanied by a hoarse voice whispering. Child, child, open the door, let me in, let me hold my grandchild a little. The innkeeper couple sat frozen, too terrified to respond. The knocking grew stronger. Knock. 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 The old woman's voice became more desperate, mixed with a sinister laugh. He. Open the door. It's me. Let me hold my grandchild. He. The innkeeper couple trembled in fear, clutching their sleeping son tightly in their arms. Suddenly, the knocking ceased, replaced by scratching sounds against the door, as if something was clawing at it. Scratch. 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 Scrape. 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 The eerie silence that followed lasted only momentarily. The innkeeper couple, shaken to their core, finally broke the silence when their son began to cry. Where? 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 Just as their son began to cry, outside the room, the knocking resumed furiously. Bang! 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 The old woman screamed hysterically. Open the door. Open. Don't cry. Don't cry. It's me. It's me. The innkeeper couple pushed further into the corner of the room's door seeming to weaken under the relentless pounding from the outside. They couldn't believe that a frail 70-year-old could possess such strength. The old woman's voice now sounded entirely different, no longer feeble as before. Now, it was the voice of a woman unknown to the innkeeper couple. My child. Don't. Don't, he. Give my child. I'm here. You, give my child back, he. The innkeeper clasped their hands in prayer, murmuring. Master. Master. Long, where are you? Please, save us. Bang. As soon as the innkeeper prayed for help, the entire door frame collapsed onto the floor. Sitting on the bed, the innkeeper and his wife were struck with fear. Standing outside the room was their elderly mother, but unlike usual, she stood upright, her white hair covering her face. Her hands, with long, menacing nails, hung loosely by her side. A strange, eerie voice echoed from her. Here. I am. The child in the mother's arms cried louder, and the innkeeper's wife pleaded. Leave us, leave our child. I beg you. They realized this was no longer their mother. Her hands gripped the door frame with claw-like nails. But as she tried to step inside, she cried out in pain. Ah, it hurts, too much. Under the oil lamp's light, they saw their mother's feet smoldering as if burned by fire. When she attempted to step inside again, her feet hit the salt mixed with ashes that the innkeeper had spread all around the room. In agony, she clawed the floor with her nails, leaving marks, and tried once more to enter. But again, her feet touched the salt mixed with ashes and burned. At this point, the innkeeper and his wife were somewhat relieved, knowing their mother couldn't enter the room. Just then, a dark figure appeared outside the door. Is anyone there? I have come back to trouble your family for one more night, said the familiar voice of Mr. Long. Realizing it was Mr. Long, the innkeeper shouted. Mr. Long, please help, my wife and mother have gone mad. Unlike yesterday, the possessed mother seemed to recognize that Mr. Long was not an ordinary man. Just as she rushed towards Mr. Long, instead of attacking him, she sought an escape route through the entrance. But Mr. Long had foreseen this. Before stepping inside, he had secured the door with 2 blessed talisman leaves. As the possessed mother reached the door, she immediately collapsed backwards, clutching her face in pain. Ah, it hurts, too much, too much. Retreating to the drinking table, the shadow of the possessed woman was illuminated by the oil lamp, casting a shadow on the wall. Immediately, Mr. Long pulled out 4 more silver nails from his person. Tap. 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 The first nail was hammered into the middle of the wardrobe. The moment the nail was driven deep into the wardrobe, eerie screams filled the house. Gah, gah, it hurts. Mr. Long thundered. You will release the souls you have captured. Tap. 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 The second nail was driven into the base of the wardrobe, and this time the sound of a crying woman could be heard. Who, it hurts, let me go, who. Inside the large shadow on the wall, a tiny shadow of a child appeared, laughing. The innkeeper and his wife noticed the change in their child. At this point, Mr. Long also pulled the nail out of the wall, and the shadow disappeared. The husband and wife who owned the inn helped the old woman onto the bed. She seemed to have fainted, her arm showing a few minor bruises from the fall, but nothing serious. Her long, sharp fingernails that had been menacing earlier were now nowhere to be seen. After tucking her in, the wife went inside to check on their sleeping son, while the innkeeper sat down opposite Mr. Long, waiting to hear what he had to say. Taking a sip of water, Mr. Long began. "Firstly, I apologize for arriving a bit late. I'm sure you must have been very scared." The innkeeper nodded, curious. "Yes, sir. Everything's settled now. Can you tell me where you've been?" Mr. Long smiled faintly. "Oh, nothing much. I went to the silversmith's the other day. Do you remember yesterday afternoon when I left the house? I casually put my hand into a clay pot under the bamboo to retrieve something." The innkeeper naturally remembered and asked. "Yes, what was it, sir?" Mr. Long replied. "A piece of silver. I took that silver to the silversmith's and had it cast into 5 silver nails, which I was supposed to pick up today. Unfortunately, I don't know what happened, but when I arrived, there were only 3 nails ready. So, I had to wait for them to finish the remaining 2, which is why I'm back a bit late. But everyone is safe, that's what matters." Although Mr. Long said this, the innkeeper understood that Mr. Long had foreseen everything. Therefore, Mr. Long cautiously instructed to scatter salt mixed with firewood ashes inside the room. This prevented the old woman from entering, and Mr. Long continued. "Earlier, I only used 3 of the nails, having only hammered 2 into the cabinet. The nails were still available, which meant that the evil spirit in my house had not been completely eliminated. That's why I said earlier that only half of the job had been completed." Trembling, the innkeeper asked, "So does that mean it will continue to harm my family, sir?" Mr. Long chuckled. "No, exorcism, whether by a wizard or by law, has different methods. Some capture, some drive out, and some release souls to seek repentance. After a complete investigation of all the facts, removing the grievances hidden in the soul is essential. And it is important that one's heart is prepared before helping others. I left 2 silver nails in here, and I've clearly explained the process. When morning comes, all you need to do is exactly as instructed." Placing the 3 nails on the table, Mr. Long looked at the innkeeper, waiting. But without hesitation, the innkeeper said, "Sir, I was very scared witnessing this event. But ultimately, it was my mother who brought this cabinet into our home. Now, if we do as you say, I find it unjust. We caused this, yet we're putting it all on someone else. I beg you, sir, is there any other way to help this spirit achieve rebirth? Whatever the cost, my family is prepared to accept it." Mr. LNG asked. "So you wish to release the deceased? But this will bring some troubles, are you still determined to do so?" The innkeeper nodded firmly. "Yes, sir. As long as there's a way I can accept. Please guide me." Mr. LNG chuckled heartily. "Ha ha ha, ha ha ha, indeed you have a compassionate heart, sir. I truly respect that. I must admit I misjudged you." Then, Mr. LNG spoke into the air. "The female spirit, have you heard me? Normally, I should banish you to the netherworld. However, the innkeeper here has a compassionate heart. Not only does he wish to spare you but also seeks to help you resolve your lingering attachments. Your plight is more pitiful than blameworthy, and before I leave here, I will assist you." Looking at the innkeeper, Mr. LNG said, "The wood used to make this cabinet was stolen from the coffin of a woman who died at the age of 30, buried only a few days before being exhumed. Her restless spirit wandered due to accumulated resentment over the years, gradually turning into a vengeful ghost. Yet, she has harmed no one so far. The death of Chu Saw is not her doing. This cabinet has been in Chu Saw's house for 3 years now, but having a spirit of the dead inside one's home is truly not a good thing. However, as you said, part of the cause also lies with the living. In a way, she is also a victim. The innkeeper wondered. But why has she been with Chu Saw's family for 3 years without harm, yet now she wants to harm my wife and child? Mr. LMG explained. This woman died in childbirth, and her child did not survive either. Therefore, when your wife gave birth, her invisible spirit mistook your child as her own. Bound to this cabinet, she is compelled to stay close and demands to hold your child. The separation between the living and the dead, in the end, she remains a ghost. Malice and resentment within such spirits are immense. It makes her want to take the child with her to replace her lost one. Over the years, her restless spirit has always been with this cabinet, unable to leave, unwilling to stay. The innkeeper, tears welling up, asked cautiously. So, what should I do now? Mr. LMG replied. To truly resolve everything, we must start from the beginning. Tomorrow, after performing a ceremony, prepare for me 2 paper effigies, one representing a woman, the other a boy, along with gold and some clothes for these figures. After the ceremony, you will write Oan Thai Ton Trang on them and burn them. As for the cabinet, if you choose to help her spirit, you must return it to the family of Oan Thai Ton Trang for them to properly handle and perform rituals, burn incense and offer prayers, so that she may find peace. I will leave you the address where she lived before leaving here. Just deliver the cabinet there and show them the name Oan Thai Ton Trang so they will understand. The innkeeper, still cautious, asked. But what if they think I'm deceiving them? Mr. LMG smiled knowingly. If that happens, simply open the left side of the cabinet and look into the upper corner. There you will find some words. If anyone from the Owen family sees those words, they will bow to you in respect, instead of accusing you of deceit. The innkeeper wanted to see the words inside the cabinet but hesitated due to fear. The next morning, as instructed by Mr. LNG, the ceremonial items were prepared in full. After the ritual and burning of the effigies, the old lady inside the house suddenly woke up, stepped out of bed, and went outside to look at her daughter. She said, "Is the food ready yet? I boiled potatoes but forgot if I turned off the stove." Hearing her mother's voice, the innkeeper's wife remembered the incident a month ago when her mother was boiling potatoes and suddenly fainted. She had been in and out of consciousness since then, lying quietly on the bed. Mr. LNG said, "Well, the old lady is fine now, the ceremony is over, and here is the address where you need to deliver the cabinet. It's better to do it sooner or later. I've been here for a long time, so now I have to go. I wish your family peace and safety in the future." Knowing that Mr. Long had decided to leave, despite wanting to stay a few more days to host him, the cautious innkeeper said, "My family is deeply grateful to you, sir. But you also work for wages, and this place is something my wife and I have prepared. We hope you'll accept it." Mr. Long opened his bag and took out exactly 10 silver coins, returning the rest to the innkeeper before saying, "If you wish to repay me, please accept this amount. After my journey, if there's employment, I only ask for 1/3 of what you earn from that trip. If not, consider this my contribution towards the funeral expenses of the deceased lady. But if there is earnings, please take 1/3 of mine and send it to Tien and Pagoda for the repairing of its roof." The innkeeper couple didn't fully understand Mr. Long's intentions, but they followed his words. Seeing him off at the gate, they wanted to accompany him further, but Mr. Long stopped them, smiling at the bamboo bush outside their gate. "Is this bamboo bush planted by your late grandfather, your wife's kin?" Startled, the innkeeper replied, "Yes, how did you know?" Mr. Long remained silent for a moment before saying, "No wonder it's destined. This bamboo was blessed by Tien and Pagoda. Though small, it carries a bit of celestial nature. If your family takes care of it, it will grow into a protective guardian, deterring unwanted spirits from entering your home. Truly, fortune amid misfortune, and blessings amidst troubles. Ha ha ha, ha ha ha. Farewell for now. As Mr. Long departed, the innkeeper prostrated on the ground from behind, his figure fading into the village's bamboo grove. No one knew where Mr. Long would go next, but wherever he went, there was always a purpose. He called his path the road of repaying destiny.